Hey guys, Jack here. Just a quick introductory note. This video is breaking down some of the legal issues and adds a legal perspective to this whole WallStreetBets, Robinhood, Gamestop, AMC, all these stocks. This whole situation that we've seen where WallStreetBets has kind of swung in and pushed a lot of these stocks up, or at least pressured them to get pushed up, especially those stocks with huge short interests against them. I'm not going to go too deep into that situation here today. This is focusing more on the class action lawsuits that have been filed against Robinhood and sort of what needs to be proved, and also some legal liability that other parties might be facing, like WallStreetBets users. It goes without saying that this video is not financial or legal advice. If you need that, go consult a licensed professional or an attorney and get that advice that you need. Without further ado, let's get into my interview with Professor William Birdthistle, an expert on securities law. I'm here with Professor William Birdthistle of Chicago-Kent College of Law, my alma mater, and was actually a professor of mine in a securities law class. So he is an expert on securities law and definitely can help shine some light on the situation we have with Robinhood and the other brokerages as well that have shut down trading or limited trading significantly on this insane situation with the meme stocks of the world, GameStop, AMC, and companies that seem to be on the verge of bankruptcy had tons of short interests against them. And somehow we saw this situation happen where they went on this meteoric rise. However, as of today, GameStop was down about 60% today at about $90 per share, still way up from where it was a few weeks ago. But it did get as high as $300 per share. Professor Birdthistle, have you ever seen anything like this before?
No, nothing at all. It depends on how broadly you want to draw your historical lens. This seems to be a little bit like a financial equivalent of something we saw in the Capitol a few weeks ago. But as far as the financial markets go, no. I'm older, quite a bit older than you. So I was in about your position when the dot-comery was at its hottest. And I remember having law school classmates who were sort of using their law school loans and converting them into options and puts and calls on crazy dot-com stocks and making money. But there was nothing like this concerted effort where people were getting the same sort of information through Reddit rooms and using that to sort of go invest in a similar target. So the short answer is no, this is unique. This is new.
So I definitely want to talk about the liability that multiple sides could be facing here, because we have on the one side brokerages like Robinhood that shut down trading at one point, or not shut down completely, but severely limited it. But you also have the other side with WallStreetBets and Reddit groups that have sort of, for lack of a better word, pumped some of these stocks. Whether it's malicious or not, that's worth discussing. But let's set the scene, I guess. What right does a brokerage like Robinhood have when it's restricting trading at all with particular securities? Can it do that willy-nilly, or does it have to establish something before it does something like this?
We're going to have to find out by looking deep inside the things that we ignore whenever we use any sort of apps, which are going to be the terms of service. I would bet a lot that the terms of service for Robinhood will say, we'll have an entire category of circumstances in which it can sharply limit, curtail, temporary stop, or even liquidate positions of its users. Now, that being said, and that'll probably give them a lot of traction. That'll probably be their primary basis for defense. Like, hey, listen, this is an extraordinary circumstance. We have a provision on extraordinary circumstances. So if we've had to halt things, we're sorry, but we have the legal right to do so. Putting it in the contract doesn't make it legally binding. My guess is what's probably going to happen is that the first contractual provision that's going to be invoked is probably an arbitration clause. Again, I haven't looked at it, but my guess is that most financial players, there's probably going to be a mandatory arbitration clause, so that any class action litigation that's pending in the SDNY right now or any other courts probably will ultimately make its way to arbitration. That being said, even if you have strong provisions that say we're allowed to do this, and even if you have arbitration clauses that say we get to litigate this or arbitrate this in a private forum, it still seems to me like it's going to be uncomfortable and expensive for Robinhood and its fellow apps, because even if you have a winning legal defense, the entire basis for the class action securities market is people bringing cases that might or might not be plausible. But the expense and the time consumption that goes into defending them is so prohibitive that a lot of defendants simply, give in to these strike suits and pay a big fat bill and walk away. Robinhood's not really going to be able to do that. Part of the problem of being a small, relatively lean startup is that you don't have the deep pockets of some other major corporations where you can simply write a nuisance check for $50 million and make the litigation go away. So I'm torn. I think that Robinhood probably has a reasonably sound basis for defending a number of these cases, but it's still, to me, from the outside, it looks like it's going to be time-consuming and very expensive. And if I didn't have other theories about how they might make money down the line, I might even say it's potentially existential for some of them.
I could definitely see that because, I mean, I can only imagine the amount of customers they've lost from this before you even get into the legal expense. But with that, since we're talking about Robinhood, its size and its liquidity, that seems to be kind of the source of a lot of this problem. We've heard kind of multiple perspectives from their CEO, Vlad Telev, I believe I'm getting his last name right, Telev. He came out at first and said with the announcement that it was trying to protect retail traders, but then later on he kind of clarifies that no, it was actually because we had this huge margin call of sorts from their clearinghouse asking for $3 billion in liquidity, and they didn't have that, so they tried to cover their bases. So how much flexibility do they have there? Is this something that has happened before where a brokerage has liquidity issues and has to halt trading on something like this? Maybe not to this scale, but anything similar?
Yeah, I mean, liquidity issues are always a problem. Liquidity is right there on the edge of, of what puts people into bankruptcy oftentimes. Rarely does a business sort of collapse so entirely that it's worth nothing. What's much more common is that it simply can't meet its immediate concerns. So long-term capital management, the hedge fund that blew up in the 90s, was arguably a liquidity problem. They held some positions in Russian rubles that were looking ugly, and were forcing them into very, very difficult situations during the crash of that time. But, arguably, if they'd been able to hold those positions for long enough, that is, if they had enough liquidity to bridge the gap, they would have come out okay on the other side. So liquidity issues arise a lot, and they're often the death knell of a lot of hedge funds and other financial players on Wall Street. What I find interesting about this circumstance is that Robinhood was able to raise so much money so quickly. So a second ago, you mentioned that they've lost a lot of users. And I would expect that they have a lot of unhappy, irate users. But it also seems to be the case that they probably brought on board a whole bunch of new users. I think I heard that they got something like 600,000 on Friday. So it's a weird circumstance where I think the more you know about the situation, the more you're likely to be sort of aggrieved at what Robinhood has done. The less you know, the more likely you're just to have heard the name Robinhood, stocks rocketing up. So I think they're both losing customers and bringing a bunch of new people in at the same time. So what was dramatic, I thought, was the fact that they could raise $3 billion in liquidity to meet these margin calls so quickly. I agree with you that the story has changed a little bit. Their first story was protecting the investors. Their second story was liquidity. Other people are sort of, floating these more conspiratorial notions that the hedge funds for whom they sell like 40% of their order flow may be making some phone calls. It's very hard to know. One of the reasons that you have litigation is to sort of demand documentation to see what exactly was going on, especially when there can be easy accusations of, market manipulation under 10b-5 of the 34 Act. So they're going to face litigation claims, and this is the kind of information that you would want to see discovered in those cases. I guess my takeaway, though, is that pretty smart people who've put a lot of money into this industry are willing to pony up $3 billion in a week. That to me suggests either the situation was so dire they had no choice, that if they didn't do that, their entire investment would be wiped out, or they think that there's still some value in Robinhood in the longer term. And if I had to guess, I would say it's because they think that there's going to be growth in that user base, notwithstanding what you just said, which I think is accurate, which is the people who are already there are probably aggrieved and more likely to be leaving Robinhood. Other people are coming in, though.
Yeah, and granted, this isn't the first sort of gaffe that Robinhood has had with its current user base. I mean, I think it was less than a year ago they had the whole shutdown. Yeah, it was during the March run-up after the crash. Their servers were shut down and trading was severely limited, completely unintentionally there. So I guess it's not the first time. And I think WallStreetBets, the page, has doubled in the last week to about 6 million users. And I guess to what you were saying, a lot of those could probably be new users on Robinhood as well, even though they might be losing some elsewhere. But speaking of market manipulation and lawsuits for that matter, there are a couple class action lawsuits open against Robinhood right now. I think one was in New York and another was in Illinois, if I'm not mistaken, alleging that Robinhood was a market manipulator. What sort of evidence would the plaintiffs there need to prove that Robinhood was in fact manipulating the market? Could you kind of break down that action for us?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, if I had to think about a 10b5 action, and that's the sort of standard clause that's used under the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 to allege market manipulation. To be honest, I actually think that the people in the WallStreetBets, in the Reddit rooms, are probably more likely to be the targets of those kinds of things. There's a sort of a famous anecdote, and I use it to teach in my SecReg class, about 50 Cent tweeting out information about a very small penny stock called H&HI, and the stock rocketed way up. And immediately he started changing his tweets and saying, sorry, do your own research, sending out a bunch of tweets that did not at all sound like 50 Cent, sounded a lot like the lawyers for 50 Cent. And I think what he was worried about was something similar to this, which was, he wasn't worried about, his lawyers were, which was, it looks like you're running a pump and dump here. And the only way to avoid being accused, and a pump and dump is one of many, but the classic instantiation of a market manipulation. And I think he would have been in a lot of trouble had he sold. So he didn't sell, and then he offered this sort of suitability advice to his 10 million Twitter followers. I think you've got something similar here, where if it's shown that there's one or two or a couple of ringleaders inside these Reddit rooms that are actually running this, and that they did pump the stock and they did dump the stock, I think they may have a more problematic situation defending against a market manipulation. WallStreetBets, it's going to be hard to demonstrate that, Robinhood, it's going to be hard to demonstrate that Robinhood specifically was running a market manipulation unless you go and you say, well, it's the shutting down of the trades. That's the problem. And for that, I think they'll point to the same defenses they might have had to their aggrieved users, which is, we're not manipulating the market intentionally. We really do have liquidity issues, and our counterparties are literally shutting off the spigot. We have no choice. There again, it comes down to the truth of the matter. And one of the reasons you have discovery, and of course, this is the claim that's more likely to be brought by someone like the SEC, you would need to present materials and documentations and communications saying, that's actually what happened. And I think that's relatively cut and dried. I think that either did happen or it didn't happen. If it did happen, that the counterparties were the ones shutting off their spigot, then I think they can't be really accused successfully of market manipulation. They might be guilty of other things, misleading their clients, handling it really badly and leaving people in sort of dire situations, liquidating accounts. So they might have a sort of ancillary array of exposure. But with respect to market manipulation itself, I think if Robinhood was actually just shutting things down because its counterparties forced it to, then I think they're okay. But as I say, the people inside the Reddit rooms, I don't know. I mean, because it's a collective action, we tend not to think that anyone's responsible. But if you and I convinced 10 people to convince 10 people to convince 10 people to pump up a stock, and we rode that stock up and then we sold it, that's just a boiler room. That's standard. That's in Sopranos. That's in Vin Diesel's movie. That's an old-fashioned technique, and it works, and it's perfectly illegal.
Do you see something like that coming out of this? Do you think it's more likely than not that there's some sort of blowback against WallStreetBets as opposed to Robinhood from the government, like the SEC? Do you see that as the more likely course then, if I'm hearing you correctly? Why
choose?
Of course.
You can, different parties can bring different kinds of claims. One thing that's worth bearing in mind is that even though WallStreetBets and the Redditors are sort of spoken of as a sort of collective Bastille storming group, it's actually a very heterogeneous group. There were people who were in there for a long time and they sort of acted somewhat in concert. A lot of people who came lately. And, based on what you said at the top about the state of of GameStop's stock price today, a lot of those people who came lately have been burned pretty badly. They may have been getting in at $100, $200, $300, and now it's down to 90. So even if you said, well, they're all in the same Reddit room, I'm not sure they have the same interests. Those people who came lately, it wouldn't strike me as crazy that some of them might look around having lost a lot of money, all of their money, and say, well, wait a second, what exactly happened here? A bunch of people in this room pumped up the stock. We came in lately, they sold out at the peak, and we got left holding the bag. as I say, because it's such a large collective, we don't tend to think of it as an individual who's responsible. But if you're a late arriver and you got burned badly, I don't know. You might look around that room and see and ask questions like that. Who exactly did this? Will the SEC do that? I'm not sure they couldn't, but I think that it's probably more likely that they'll start with Robinhood. On the other hand, if it turns out after the fact that 3 people, had a Twitter exchange or a Signal exchange where they really said things like, "Hey, let's do this. This is an easy way to do it." And certainly, I think people have to be thinking about that today. Given how successful GameStop was, I'm sure there must be people, Nigerian princes, people like that who are thinking things like, "This is great. We just need to form another Reddit group. We need to pump another stock, and we'll run exactly what this is, which is a large-scale pump and dump." So I'm not saying that case is easy or obvious, and it certainly depends on what facts actually transpired, but I don't see why it couldn't be alleged. And, it's possible that something like that was actually what was happening. I don't know.
But in either case, it sounds like what both cases are missing, the one either against the brokerages, Robinhood, or against WallStreetBet users or specific users, that is, you're kind of missing a smoking gun at the moment, and we need more evidence to suggest that they actually did manipulate the market in either case.
Yeah, that's right. And, that's what discovery is for. That's how litigation typically begins. The accusations are brought, and then months, years of actually transferring and disclosing materials and having people go through those materials. That's the basis for litigation. The SEC also has the ability to audit people in the financial markets, players in the financial markets, so they can do it too. But yeah, we don't have that smoking gun right now. On the other hand, everybody in those groups, this isn't like a classic boiler room where everyone's in the same office in New Jersey and they're just talking to each other, behind their wrists or outside. Almost all of this must have transpired electronically. These people are all disaggregated. So are there some WhatsApp? Are there some tweets? Are there some texts? Are there some chats, emails? Possibly. But it would be an interesting case to ask if the only communications that occurred were the public ones in the Reddit group. Is that sufficient? If 5 people can run a pump and dump, can 5,000? I'm not sure. You start to lose some of the scienter as it sort of dissipates through a large group. I'm not sure it goes away altogether. And again, this reminds me a little bit, I don't want to get too carried away, but there are a lot of parallels, maybe not a ton of parallels, but there are some parallels between the financial activity that's occurring now and the political activity that occurred not that long ago. And, how large can a conspiracy be? If 5,000, 10,000 people all do something that's illegal, does that make it not illegal? No.
Right.
Not really. It may make it harder to prove. You may still have to look for ringleaders, but it doesn't eliminate the illegality, if in fact that's what happened.
I think we'll wrap it up on that note. I think that summarizes it well. This is a complicated problem, no doubt, and we're learning more each day. So we'll definitely keep posted on this issue since, it gets more interesting by the day as well. But Professor Birdthistle, I appreciate you very much for coming on to the channel and helping to share your knowledge about the situation and hopefully clarify a few things for us.
Yeah, my pleasure, Jack. Thanks for having me on.
Hey guys, one more thing before you go. Check out Professor Birdthistle's book, Empire of the Fund. It is a few years old at this point, but it has some great insight on the mutual fund and 401k industry. Definitely would recommend checking it out if you're at all interested in it. And also if you liked anything that Professor Birdthistle had to say or his perspective on the issues, it is a great book and it is pretty digestible despite having some otherwise decently complex topics about law in the mutual fund industry. Definitely check it out. Would recommend it. I'll include a link in the description below. But if you like this video, definitely like it since that would help the channel out a lot, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new updates since I put out new videos every single week and wouldn't want you guys to miss out. But until next time, take care.